It happened on the mysterious Isle of Seacliff by Ian Gordon. 12. The Return of the Sleeping King. December 31st, 3:30 p.m. Am I still Edgar Howarth? I suppose the answer to that question, technically, is yes. But what have I become? We're gathered at the promenade, hundreds of us, by the vast stone platform projecting from the ocean. Is that where he'll position himself? The sun is fading fast. It's cold, devastatingly so. But my gloved hand continues to scribble these words. Must continue. Must document everything. In spite of the overwhelming droning that's slowly filling my head, I'm having to fight to resist it, to stop it from preventing thought altogether. They're all here. Miss Black and her colleagues, young Moffat and his pals, Howie and Hodds, the towering Seven Sisters, the lady in grey with her toes in the water, the miner, James Johnston, his leathery face as white as the surf, the mysterious, soft-spoken Catherine, her delicate hands in the air, the senior with the walking stick, Paul, and his young companion, the cafe owner, Shanna, and my drinking buddies, Christensen, Patterson, Strickland, and Charlwood, all of them waiting for the return of the Sleeping King. Relatively few are spouting the name of the Sleeping King. Amongst them the town councillors, Mr. Shulpov and Mr. McKeaney, Coretta Scott, the herbalist, Mr. Rhys Davis, the botanist, the proprietor of the little wool shop, Mrs. Hadley, and a staggeringly gaunt individual I've seen a time or two at the Golden Crab, the taciturn giant I've heard referred to as Mr. Skull. But everybody is smiling. All are jovial. There's a keen sense of community here, and a dedication to something that I believe they feel is essential to their continued existence on the Isle of Seacliff. How much longer will we have to wait, I wonder? December 31st, 4:30 p.m. The moon is upon us, a full moon. It's glowing a bright red now, a fiery red that has once more transformed the ocean below it into a huge pool of blood. The call is ferocious, that endless din emanating from vast, alien vocal cords. The locals are dancing now. Some are singing. Those with small children are pointing and whispering in their ears, resulting in beaming smiles and excitable chuckles. I can't say I feel the same. I'm caught somewhere between the recollection of lifelong dreams and the frigid reality of that which I'm assuredly about to witness in the waking world. But what of Edgar Howarth, the man who penned stories such as The Clipston Conspiracy and The Horror at Stoke Row? He's sure that this is nothing but a dream, that the alien being rising from the deep is just a figment of his imagination. But that relentless din, that call from the sea, this Edgar Howarth, the one who was born on the Isle of Seacliff, knows that the return of the Ancient One is imminent. Later. The droning has ceased, abruptly so at that. The islanders are restless, anxious. The full blood moon is bathing everything in its crimson light. The waters are churning now. Red waves are lapping at the promenade, gradually increasing in frequency and ferocity. There, on the horizon, a shape beneath the water, a vast, dark shape, rising now, breaking the surface. It's him! I must... December 31st, 11:15 p.m. Horror? Madness? How else can I describe it? Mere words are wholly insufficient. I'm here again, by the window in my suite at the Golden Crab, gazing out to sea. A bright white moon illuminates both the dark ocean and the deserted market square. The population of the Isle of Seacliff diminished earlier this evening. 35 men and women offered themselves willingly to the thing they call 2-on-1. The rest of us simply stood in silence, watching. I felt a mixture of awe and terror, a puzzling combination. But let me start from the beginning. When that thing emerged from the bloody waters, I all but froze. My limbs ceased to function. My eyes were wide. I was caught somewhere between fear and paralysis. Through eyes that wanted to close, I beheld the sleeping king under the light of the crimson moon. Graciously he approached, his vast bulk sending forth a barrage of waves. The cold waters splashed and splashed, yet motionless I remained. Motionless we all remained. In his presence I ceased to think. I could only watch as the alien form rose higher and higher, larger and larger, closer and closer. His enormous form, the size of a church, slithered into position atop the bare titanic rock, a mass of iridescent tentacle-like limbs attaching themselves to the stone. A fleshy trunk, the width of a house, rose from the appendages, towering tree-like above the platform. Atop this strange torso sat an appalling head. My eyes watered as I gazed upon it. As depicted throughout Redditch, the head, like that of the humble coalfish, consisted of a terrible, leering snout, 2 glistening eyes as black as a shark's, and atop the crown at least a dozen twitching, translucent feelers. The whole visage was made all the more terrible by the mud, the chunky, deep-sea sludge that dripped from every limb and every protuberance. As the thing shambled and gyrated, its dead eye seeking its prey, I sought the protection of my shaking, gloved hands. Up they came, covering eyes that wouldn't close. To have gazed a moment longer at the thing would have been to call its name, to give myself willingly, as some of the others were about to do. Having averted my gaze from the thing, and continuing to shield myself from it with cupped hands, I watched in horror as certain islanders, one by one, began to wade into the sea in the direction of their deity. I saw 4 of the 7 sisters, the lady in grey leading the way, followed by 3 members of the Silhouettes. Old Man Johnston, held above the waters by my drinking pal, Mr. Patterson, the bartender, Mr. Warad, the widow, Mrs. Strickland, the councillors, Shulpov and McKeaney, these, and many more, all of them murmuring the name of the sleeping king. 2-on-1, 2-on-1. As I stood there, a memory that before had been nothing more than images glimpsed in a dream came back to me with crystal clarity. I realized that I'd stood in the presence of the sleeping king before. I've spoken of my dreams, visions of the seafront, a huge rocky platform, faces surrounding me, but I know now that those dreams were recollections. In the winter of 1940, in the company of 100 or so islanders and my parents, I stood on the promenade at Redditch and watched as several children, including a boy who looked just like me, boarded a dory and were cast off into the night. Due to the inactivity of the critters that year, the sleeping king had failed to surface, and so, fearing retribution, the people of Seacliff had offered up 7 children in order to placate him. According to the Silhouettes, who watched from Watcher's Peak, a large, dark shape pulled the dory under, confirming 2-on-1's acceptance of the prophet gift. And so, it was assumed that the god was appeased. There was dancing and merriment, just as there was this very evening. But my parents, as evidenced by their decision to leave the isle shortly afterwards, must have felt that it wasn't enough, that the sleeping king might return in quick succession to feed upon their remaining son. Abruptly, I was drawn out of my reverie by a sound, a disgusting, slopping sound. The sleeping king was feeding. He slobbered and chomped, crunched and swallowed, over and over again. But there were no cries of anguish, no screams of pain. The willing victims of 2-on-1 slipped down his alien gullet without so much as a whimper. Was my brother so easily consumed 50 years ago? This time around, the sleeping king was feeding well. With every morsel, every chunk of human anatomy that he devoured, strange, low vocalizations were produced, utterances audible only to the people of Seacliff, those of us with the strange apertures behind our ears. And then it was over. I heard a thunderous splash as the sleeping king returned to the ocean. I ventured a glance in his direction and saw the last of his tentacles disappear beneath the surface. A sizable wave drenched the promenade, and then, as the dark shape that was 2-on-1 faded into the depths of the North Sea, the cheering began. The islanders jumped up and down, embraced one another, shed tears. For it wasn't a horror show they'd just witnessed. It was the fulfillment of an age-old tradition. The sleeping king had fled his home world eons ago, sought refuge on this pale blue dot. The pact between him and the people of Seacliff had been established long before rational thought entered the minds of men. To sacrifice themselves to their god was as natural as the changing of the seasons. Tonight, those who surrendered themselves to 2-on-1 did so willingly. But I'm not sure the same can be said for my brother and the other children sacrificed 50 years ago. January 1st, 1991, 6:30 a.m. I met with the sleeping king in my dreams last night, met with him in a dark, sunken world, just as I have done for years, it would seem. He was kind, sympathetic. In the context of that aquatic realm, his appearance no longer troubled me. I suspect that, like the humble blobfish, 2-on-1 was never meant to surface. He's a dweller of the deep, an alien deep, a world that only our wildest fantasies can offer even the remotest glimpse. He tells me that my recollections are flawed. The 7 children he fed upon in the winter of 1940 offered themselves willingly. Never has he fed upon a reluctant subject. I know now why they call him the Sleeping King. He's hiding in his subaquatic lair, waiting. He wants to go home, to return to where he came from, the smooth-surfaced moon we call Europa. But the unspeakable beings that drove him and his kind out will never allow it. What strange dreams they were. What strange dreams they've always been. The apertures behind my ears are gone. It's like they were never there. Rather like 2-on-1 himself. If I've learned anything, it's this. I belong here on Seacliff. I've always belonged here. This journal will serve as a chronicle of a private journey. I've come full circle now. The question is, where do I go from here? And so ends the account of Edgar J. Howarth. As of yet, nobody has been able to vouch for the authenticity of the events as described in the account, and the man himself is unable to comment due to the fact that he hasn't been seen nor heard from since departing Fisherman's Cottage in Staithes on the morning of December 26th, 1990. Questioned in the years since Howarth's alleged visit, inhabitants of the Isle of Seacliff's capital, Redditch, deny ever meeting him, despite the intimate descriptions of numerous residents and locations included in the account. The same can be said for Gordon Cooper, the fisherman who ostensibly agreed to transport Howarth to and from the island. The handwritten journal, upon the pages of which the account was scribbled, was found in a leather hold-all washed ashore at Runswick Bay on January 4th, 1991. Some have suggested that perhaps the imaginative author got himself into a spot of bother during his purported visit to the isle, due to an unusual item found in the vicinity of the hold-all, a blood-stained plastic arm belonging to a statue or stage prop. His whereabouts remain unknown to this day.